Okay. So thanks everyone. Welcome to the 4 p.m. session. I'm pretty excited about this one. It's been a long time since I've been able to work with Coach Lantzy because I last played for him in 1997. But we've had some great interactions back and forth. He's carried on his coaching career and done some great things down in North Carolina, and paid really close attention to me when my lacrosse career kind of moved on after graduating from St. Andrews. So I'm really happy to have Coach Lantzy presenting today. He's the assistant athletic director and head coach at Durham Academy in North Carolina. So kind of speaks volumes when you're talking about an institution such as DA. I've had the pleasure of being around the campus and through it the odd time. I haven't been there in a few years, but it's something I want to get back to and see again. So without further ado, please welcome Coach Lantzy.
All right, Brad, thanks for the introduction. Very kind. And like Brad said, I'm glad to be here as well. Brad and I go way back. That was my first head coaching job at St. Andrews way back in '97 as a spry 27-year-old. We just had a fun interaction. I think Brad just saw my daughter for the first time, who's now 17, and my wife, who I think held us all together back in those days when we were trying to nav learning as a group. So I'm really happy to be talking today about something that I'm passionate about after almost 30 years of coaching. And, the idea of culture, communication, leadership, team building through, three core words in the idea of culture, communication, and leadership that get thrown around quite a bit in the coaching circles. I think everybody kind of comes at it from a different place. Believe firmly that a lot of this has to do with past experience, learned failures, successes along the way. And I think this is kind of my attempt after 28 years of succeeding, failing, trying, watching, learning, doing my definition of what these things are and how they can relate to a high school lacrosse program, which I think for me personally, this is something I'm very passionate about, is the idea of great teacher, educator, coaches, which I think in the newfound world of lacrosse and over the past decade, I don't know if they've become less important, but less prominent in the forefront of the lacrosse community, but still the foundation of the bedrock of almost all player experiences. The scholastic experience at the high school level, it's always a little bit different. It's a 5-6 day a week endeavor over an extended period of time. It's year round. It's the first sense of like a real program, the ups and downs of doing it with your friends and the people you grew up with. And the idea that you can't trade those guys in, right? The idea that you got those guys, right? That you can't say, hey, it's not going well, I'm going to just go over club team B over here and give it another opportunity. So you have to find a way to use these words in culture, communication, and leadership, and building teams to get the most out of each individual, varying, platforms of ability, experience, maturity, the age range. All of those things make it, I think, a very unique experience. And I still think, for me personally, my longtime high school coach passed away unexpectedly after retiring after a 41-year-old career in Buffalo, New York. Was my football and lacrosse coach. I think in retrospect, you just think how important those people are and the foundation of who you become. I think Brad and I's relationship, some formidable years, even back then, that were important to both of us, in my development and his, as a person first, and a player and a coach second. So no ado, we're gonna just kind of dive into this. This is a little bit of a interactive piece. I'm gonna pose a bunch of questions. I give my answer. I know Brad's monitoring the Q&A. Feel free to share your ideas and thoughts as we go. I may ask Brad to jump in here a little bit with some of his thoughts to keep the conversation going, but we're going to tackle the idea of culture first. I stumbled across this definition. My daughter was in 9th grade. I was kind of kicking this lecture around a year and a half or so ago. She was in world history, and I'm like, they were talking about, cultural systems. And I thought this definition was really appropriate. Culture is the system of shared beliefs, values, customs, behaviors, and artifacts that members of society use to cope with their world and with one another, that are transmitted from generation to generation through learning. I started thinking about my time as an athlete, my time at different places along the way in my career, that, this definition is broad enough and specific enough to kind of encompass what we're trying to accomplish as coaches within our communities. The idea of shared beliefs, values, customs, behaviors, the things that you make as traditions and core tenets in your program are usually your guiding principles for helping you make choices when things are tough, making choices when things are going well, and trying to keep that foundation for growing young men and young people and young women to be the best they can be. And I tell my guys all the time, it's like drawing that line in the sand for yourself. When you're young, it's a faint line. It's going to move a lot. As you get older, like, I'm 50 now, and I start looking at the backside of this, and guys like Brad have been doing this a long time. That gets a little more cavernous, and those foundations that you've built over time through past experiences are the things that really help you protect the people you love. And it's typically your team, right? If you really care and you do this well, you really, really are invested emotionally in each and every one of these kids' success is in their development as people through the sport of lacrosse, which obviously we all love, or we wouldn't be here. So we're going to use that as the foundation as we go through about, thinking of culture. And I think, how culture is established in an athletic program or your team. I think one of the things in the short-sightedness, and I think, I spent many years as a college coach before getting into high school. The idea sometimes is leaders of programs and kids, we kind of say, okay, I'm going to take this opportunity because it's there in front of me. I want to be a head coach. You don't ask a lot of questions about the institutional mission or how your train of thought or what you value fits into how the institution values it or maybe doesn't value it. So I think as you start developing what your program stands for, the idea of a mission statement, not only crafted for your own program, but fits into the greater context of your community. Fortunate at Durham Academy is a great independent private college prep school. It's a K through 12 environment. So for a lot of these kids, I've known or had my hands on or in and around for most of their lives by the time I get them to high school. So part of the mission of our school is kind of ingrained in what we do as a program. So it allows consistency, right? The ability to teach lessons and messaging, to be relatively the same for many of the adults that are involved in these kids' lives at that age. The other things that could influence this, your institutional handbook. All schools have a set of rules, policies, and procedures that are universal, and that, your program's not exempt from the rules that the school or institution abides by, and you need to know those. Typically, athletic departments have more strict rules on some things. Our school has a training policy for athletes regarding substance abuse, tobacco use, social things that's much more strict than the one used by the general student body. Kind of encompasses you all the time, even when you're not at school, or something that could come up that happens, outside the school environment that we're made aware of. So, obviously you have to work your framework of what and how you operate your school within your program, within the framework of your school. Obviously governing bodies. I'm sure we have people on all walks on this call, but obviously that could be your conference association, your state governing body, the NCAA, NAIA, the different things that govern different levels of sport. Obviously, in the world we're in right now, that's never more prevalent, right? As much as we think we're important, all the things we're doing here in the short term are being decided by macro governing bodies that are kind of giving us the latitude to do things or not do things, and including right now broadly, the governments of our countries, our local community leaders, our school leaders. So we have a lot of people right now that are kind of giving us a real world view of working within the framework of all these different things that manage what we do. Conference bylaws, those things are important as well. I say, why is culture important to long and short-term success? I think that any of us that have been doing this long enough, and I think over time and years, Brad knows me well. I'm a very, very competitive human being by nature, and was as a player, had a lot of success as a player through my athletic career. So I transitioned into coaching. Obviously the idea of wanting the result, right? The idea that we're trying to win as much as we can, and that still holds true. I think anytime I go into a season, the idea of winning or losing is really important, right? The result does matter, right? And as you embark on these things, the real hard work and the idea is in the process of the result, right? And then what does the process look like, right? And it involves all those things in the list above. The process can't have shortcuts that stray from your core tenets and mission. Your process can't have shortcuts that work outside the priorities of your institution, right? Your shortcuts can't go outside, the rules and governing. Like right now, as much as any coach thinks their kids need them or want them out there to train, I mean, the rules and regulations do not allow you to go out there. And if you were a coach or a leader of people and you just ignored that or said, hey, you know what, I'm just going to go out and train a bunch of guys, that's not what you should be doing. Or are you setting a great example for these things that you say you value? So I think that, having the process of trying to have success on the field through sport is inevitably tied to these structures and frameworks you're given to work within. And I've always told all the boys, and this includes coaches as well, that we're all trying to be the best version of ourselves without losing our identity, while working within all these constraints we're given to try and succeed or not succeed. All right, or at least judge us or give us parameters for what we can and cannot do. And they're there for a reason. I tell our guys, hey, we live in a democracy. You can do whatever you want, but choices come with consequences, and you need to know what those are when you're making choices. So, culture in, the greater sense, like how do you quantify or measure success in developing a culture? This is like the hardest part of, a qualifying statement that you want to quantify, right? How do we measure success? I know in my program at the beginning of the year, I try every year to give the kids as much input into what we're trying to do. And on our first official practice day, we never go on the field. We start the day small groups with our leadership, including the coaches, and the older guys kind of nav a conversation, doing some, whiteboarding and some goal setting. They come back with 4 things that are important to them. We all share out, try and come up with a list of 5 for that year, discuss why, and we put that up in the locker room. We put those boards up on the locker room so we see what our thought processes are, allowing the kids to have some say when we're having tough moments. Hey, let's talk about what you guys wanted. Those are your words. What are we doing right now in this drill, or what are we doing in and around school that's strained from there? So I think it's really important to let the kids have some say in goal setting. You as the managing adult of any group at this level, obviously know the parameters better than most, can guide the conversations to make sure that they fit into those things. And once you set some goals, the evolution and process of evaluation, are they short-term goals? Are they more macro in nature? At what point do we set, and evaluate those? Are they weekly? Are they, daily? Some are all of those things. Are they long-term for the season? I have a great saying I use with the guys, and we really try and be in tune with those individual victories of progression, right? Knowing where you are, knowing where you hope to go, and trying to get there. And, for kids to really feel valued, wanted, it doesn't matter if you're the kid who just picked up a stick or you're a high school American on your way to wherever. The idea that when we all recognize as a group where somebody is, where they hope to go, they've stated that and recognize when they've hit those milestones, it's really rewarding for kids and really empowering to see how quickly they can improve, or even the most veteran player, the milestone that they can overcome and become even better in some maybe non-tangible physical thing, but a better leader, a better person, a better teammate. So, feedback, I think for a lot of coaches, this is a hard thing, right? A lot of coaches are very resistant on feedback, right? I mean, we give kids feedback all the time, right? They Parents want to know, how am I doing? You're critical, you're analytical, you're sort of all those things. And at the end, when say an administrator says, hey, listen, we're going to go through and give your players and your parents an opportunity to give some feedback, people get really, really nervous. Like somehow you wouldn't want that, or you get nervous about what might be said. I'm the exact opposite of that. You should welcome feedback. The idea that you should want to know what your athletes feel and how they're feeling in perception or reality. Parents as well, or people in your community that are stakeholders in what you're trying to do. It's really important to hear what they feel and think. And sometimes it is in perception, sometimes it is the reality, and sometimes as a coach, you have to take pause and reevaluate what you're doing, the messaging you're giving, and maybe you can do it better. And I think as I've gotten older, those subtle changes and listening is probably the thing that's made me the better coach and the better educator and the better administrator, is the idea to listen a little bit more. I'm far from perfect myself. I don't know everything. I do a lot of this stuff myself and listen to other people talk. Call up some folks when I'm struggling. I've really tried to develop a big professional network of coaches that are at my level, that are at schools similar to mine, when I'm struggling, to try and bounce some things off of them before you make a decision on emotion or how you're feeling initially. So I would say get with your school administrators, find a way to decide what culture means to you within the framework of your school. And I know everybody says I get the private school piece because you have a K through 12. I say the public school, I'm a public school guy, is K through 12 as well. I mean, your district is K through 12. It's just harder. It's a lot more work for the public school head coaches and programs to be ingrained all the way down to the bottom, or the feeder of their program. So we'll get to that at the end. We start talking about player development. But I think it's the idea of culture, the idea of, communication. And I think that this is the thing that I hear a lot of young coaches who get some really bad advice, and people tell them, oh, parents, they shouldn't be involved. Like, it's about the kids, it's whatever. And I couldn't disagree more strongly on who and how you're communicating. If you're an effective, direct communicator about the parameters of your program and the culture and where each stakeholder fits in, including the parents, there should be no issue with you communicating anything that's important to your guys, to your parents. And you shouldn't really be saying or doing things that you would not want the adult in these children's lives to know about. So the idea of what are you communicating to kids and how are you doing that, it has to be aligned with, the things we talked about prior in the idea of your culture, your institutional parameters, and, clear, effective, timely communication is so key to relationship building at the scholastic level. I can remember back, I was a high schooler in the early 80s, obviously pre-technology era. And, the kids were reliant on to give information to their parents. You get home the schedule, you put it on your refrigerator, and it's up there, and everybody works off the same thing. And, but obviously the world has changed. We're connected. Things happen in real time. Almost all of your schools have some form of communication they use, macro for your athletic department, be it the school's website, some of the RSS feeds for scheduling, macro calendars for practice, those things. I know it's, this past weekend would have been our state championship down here in North Carolina. And I always draft an email the weekend prior to the state tournament starting that talks about our summer workouts and the school calendar for the next year. And all of you have already had a school calendar published for next year, for days off and spring break and late start days and, early dismissal days, all those things that impact what you do every day. And I write it prior, and I wait till, the season ends. And literally the day after the season ends, I send a wrap-up paragraph and send out to the parents like, hey, we're starting next year. I send that to all our returning varsity players. I send it to any kid that expressed any interest during the year but didn't come out for the team. I send it to every one of our middle school programs. and every sixth grade family that played youth lacrosse the year prior that will be playing in our middle school program about what our spring will look like, what our expectations are of your time. I think right now for high school coaches, that one of the hardest things to have is the pull on kids' time. Having a college-bound field hockey player in my household, my daughter, going through that, who's a really good student, also was a very good high school lacrosse player, trying to nav her time to meet her obligations is harder than it's ever been. So we as parents, my wife and I, love information. Helps us, support our daughter, and that's what you're trying to do when you're building relationships. Is we're all in it for the kids, and I try and tell the adults involved in this process that let's keep all the discussion in a kid-centered approach. Even the toughest moments, if you keep the child at the center of the conversation and not make it about you or them, usually a positive result. Even the toughest moments will happen. So, how are you communicating? I think for the high school level, this gets a little complicated right now. Even in the era right now, we're on a Zoom call. I mean, the access we have to kids and how we're communicating with kids is ever changing. I mean, who would ever thought we're having multiple meetings with our guys online, digitally, in a format we're not used to regulating or have a lot of regulation over. Our schools put some clear restrictions in. We use Microsoft Teams for all school stuff, and some real restrictions on Zoom and things that aren't as secure. And the one thing you have to remember, and I think even if you got some youth guys or some guys in the Canadian system that are in the junior A process, or the midgets and the novice, the minors, they're minor children. They're not adults. And we hear a lot of college coaches talk. Every kid in college is 18. They're making their own choices. They are an adult, legally an adult that makes their own choices. I mean, those kids don't even have to share their grades with their parents if they don't want to. That's just the way it is. As high school coaches, youth coaches, people dealing with people and children under the age, we're dealing with minor children. And that comes with an additional set of responsibilities that's huge. And what we're doing for their development, how we interact with those kids. I mean, I came from Duke University before I came to DA, and my AD, who just retired, who was my athletic director here, was just an awesome guy. And he gave me 2 pieces of advice when I got started. He said, "Hey, John, listen, at this level, if you care a lot, it's really hard. If you don't care that much, it's not that hard to be a high school coach." And he also said, "Hey, here's the 3 things you can't do. Like if you do anything, language, cussing, I mean, there's just no place for that in the scholastic environment. Demeaning, sarcasm, the things that kids really struggle with." He goes, if somebody makes issue of it, is everybody perfect that way?" He said, "No." He goes, "But if somebody makes issue with you in language, those things, like, we can't help you. Like, there's no excuse for demeaning, demonstrative behavior. There's no excuse for using language that's just not meant for the school environment. And just because you're out in the field doesn't make it appropriate." So there's ways of messaging that are effective that don't involve those things. So I think, if you're going to get into this, you got to, once again, it goes back to culture and fitting into the system of parameters you have at your school. You better understand what those are before you go out there. This goes back to what I said at the very beginning, that if you're a coach and you say, "Right, I want to be a head coach really bad," and you don't have a lot of great communicating amongst the adults about what those expectations are or what the macro piece is, you could be setting yourself up for failure, because you're saying, "Hey, that's just how I do it." And that's great until it goes wrong, right? And then when it goes badly and somebody makes issue of something you've said or done, or maybe the messaging you're giving the kids about what they're allowed to do, and it gets back, and the administration layer drops over you onto the kids, and they're going to be like, "So what's going on?" And the kids will say, "Well, my coach says this or that." And the people at the top end are going to be like, "You kidding me? That's not how we operate." And it's going to be really bad for everybody. The kids, most importantly, also you and your effectiveness, even if you can get through that as a leader, and your trust factor moving forward. So I think the idea of setting clear expectations and what you want for the kids and your culture, along with communicating directly, effectively, appropriately, builds trust, right? And I think in the end, that's what we're all trying to do. Trust, right? We're in a human endeavor coaching. It's an emotional thing by nature. And people that are invested feel strongly about whatever perspective they're coming from. So we have to have processes in place. We have to have systems in place to help manage those moments that it's not perfect, and it's not always perfect. I can think back and cringe about my time as a young coach, coaching Brad and those guys, as a 27-year-old coach who had a lot of ideas and not a lot of experience. And, sometimes I could go back and say, man, if I could just do that again, I probably would have done it a lot differently. But the trust, though, that I earned through those guys, through these things, even then allowed us to manage those tough moments. And I think at the end, have something meaningful that we can all look back upon, just because we're vested in those macro things, our goals and expectations. And I think over my entire career, I think that's something that's been important. I've gotten a lot better at it with age and perspective. But, so have a clear understanding of how and what you should be communicating. And when you get that, do it frequently, involve everybody that needs to. I mean, every email I send to my kids, I send to their parents. Every email I send to my kids and parents, I put my administrators on. I'm not hiding anything. I'm a fully transparent, open book for what we're trying to do. And that's the way it should be. Like, if you feel you can't be that way, I would say you might have to look in the mirror and say, why is it I wouldn't want to share that with the other adults that are helping support these children? Why wouldn't I want to share that with my direct administrator, who ultimately is going to evaluate the success of what I'm doing out there with this group of kids? So I would say, it's like I tell my guys, like, hey, if you're doing something you would never tell your mother, it's probably a bad idea, right? If you would never bring it up at your dinner table, you're probably kind of outside the lines. All right. So I kind of feel the same way about communicating.
Coach, could you back that up one,
Sure.
or I guess 2 slides down, one more?
That one? Yeah.
Yeah. Like this is an area that I struggle with in a couple contexts, and I know there's some other coaches out there as well. But you know what? Maybe it was one more.
What do we? This one?
That's the one right there. Clear, effective, timely communication, key to relationship building. And that one has almost become cliche because I've become a learning facilitator up here. I've progressed through that path, and I'm pretty close to finishing that stuff off. But I get to interact with a lot of coaches. I get to see a lot of different things. Coaching Team Israel, being involved at the World Championships allows me to interact. And I think coaches need to understand that just because you're talking a lot doesn't mean that you're actually meeting that goal of clear, effective, and timely communication. And I know I've ruffled a lot of feathers in different areas through my teams and associations, and I've rubbed them completely the wrong way, because I will take the communications and I will bounce it off 3 or 4 people to does this meet our messaging? Does this meet our end goal? Because there's nothing worse, and I had it happen to me, and I remember specifically, it was 2001. It was my first year of head coaching junior B lacrosse in Canada, and a kid came to me after practice and said, "Coach, you kind of gave me a hard time here. We run a transition drill. You told me to cut here, but you do realize at practice last week, you told me to do this." And I'm sitting there thinking back. I'm like, yeah, he's right. He's absolutely right. So I found myself, even in practices while instructing, thinking about it a few extra seconds before I said it, just to process that. And I get pro guys coming back to me now and telling me horror stories about lack of communication on a lot of ends. And we all build that. But I just think that's an area where coaches need to self-educate, reach out. I mean, I've had ideas throughout the years, and I've called you, and I think that's just one of those resources where you can take as many courses as you want, and you can say you got to do it, but you got to be self-educated, and you've got to be self-accountable to that kind of thing. Because, like I said, you might talk a lot, but what are you saying, and kind of how are you saying it?
Right. I mean, it's well said. And I think as I've gotten older, my greatest strength is when you have to know what you don't know to improve. Right. I mean, the idea that as a coach, when you look at, we're not going to really talk about game planning, but, in the end, every year I write a scouting report on my own team. And I say, if John Lantzy's coaching against John Lantzy's team, what would they write? And then that's how I build out how we, spend our time in practice. What's on the deficiency list? Individually, you'd write individual. Macro, you'd write stuff and say, how do I help that kid get his skill set somewhere? How do I get my team to, ride or clear or transition better or whatever we're doing? And you have to do that for yourself as a coach as well. Like, self-evaluate yourself and say, and once again, like the evaluation piece, be open to hearing criticism, right? And then develop a trusted professional network and not be afraid to ask, right? You have to ask, right? I mean, if you aren't sure, ask somebody who you think might know better. Or maybe my college coach is that way for me. He's a great man. He's like a father to me. And when I'm struggling, before I do anything, I call him. He's just a calming guy who I trust. He was a great coach. He's been a great administrator through the end of his career. And if I have a really tough moment, I will not make a decision until I speak with him, and those things are really important. So I do think the idea of having a clear idea of what you want to say, Brad, like the beginning part and how it fits in. And you're right, as an organizational leader that you've turned into, that there's nothing more frustrating than the people that are in your organization communicating things that aren't part of your organization, right? And that's very frustrating for an athletic director. That's very frustrating for a head of school or a principal, because the end result, when it goes bad, will not be good, right? So that's why you should share what you're communicating. So there's no sense of, if maybe you're sending a message that doesn't align, it can be caught earlier, and you got to be willing to hear that. If your AD says, hey, listen, man, I'm not sure we want to be saying that. So moving forward, let's say it a different way. Or if your organization is a junior, whatever, you know what, and if you can't or you don't feel strong, then you shouldn't work there. I mean, that's in the end, right? I mean, those are choices you have to make in messaging, that if you're being told to give a messaging that doesn't fit in your core belief system, or you don't feel you can effectively coach without doing that, then that's not the place for you. Yeah. So, you can't put a square peg in a round hole when it comes to those things. You can't say, well, I don't really care what they think. I'm just going to do it my way. That's just a result for really bad. It's going to be okay for a little bit, but it'll be crash and burn in the end, whenever that moment comes.
Yeah. So. No, and that's great. I mean, giving an example of that with Team Israel for our box program this past fall, we actually put a list together of words that we were using, descriptive words, just so we were all on the same page. And these were the words that needed to be in our scouting reports. These are the words that needed to be used throughout so that the messaging was consistent.
Yeah, listen, when I was at Canisius as a young coach, as a GA, I had a great guy to work for when I started my career. And he used to, when we write scouting reports, he used to say least best of three. Like, nowhere would you ever say a kid was bad or the worst, or he just said least best of three in a unit when we were writing scouting reports. And, that's always stuck with me. It made sense to me, right? The way he explained it, how you're messaging to the kids, and how they're going to view the words you use will impact how they approach what you're writing. So that stuck with me. I think, Brad, you can probably find a scouting report for Limestone, who I didn't like very much, but I never said bad or worst. I said least best of three. So, so transparency, expectations, what you're communicating, the institutional flow chart, and we'll move on to the next thing in leadership and get the skill stuff. When I first started this process, trying to understand this better, I looked at a lot of pre-existing curriculums. Jeff Jensen, who lives down in this neck of the woods, who has a great curriculum for leadership out there. Talked to some folks at Duke and Carolina. At the end of the summer, I met with Willie Scroggs, a former coach at Carolina, who I've gotten to be great friends with, and he's been a great mentor of mine, who ran the leadership program inside the Carolina athletic department when he was in all those years as an administrator. I was all proud to show him what I've done or learned and talk about this stuff. I met him over at the golf course at Carolina for some lunch, and he was like, John, listen, before you start telling kids what to do, you better make sure the adults are all on the same page and know what they're talking about. And he goes, institutions are pretty bad at that. He said, so particularly at the high school level, for those of you on here that are coaches in high school settings, you're not the only voice to these kids. They could be on the soccer team. They could be in the debate program. They could be in a musical group, or any of the multiple things overlapping one another. In the end run, it's like the educational, your pedagogy, right? That's like your style of teaching. And that's how you get to put your flavor on it. But in the end, if you have a kid on your team that was the lead in the musical, played soccer, played lacrosse, and did debate, the adults in those organizations, the messaging should be relatively the same, Brad. It's like what you're saying, the words, right? Like, what is important for what we're trying to get out of this? It should be the same. If not, it's very confusing to the kids, right? So you're not the only voice they have. So making sure you're unified as an institution, the people that are giving that message is really important. So we'll move on. Leadership. I mean, leadership is, we're doing something really unique with the pause in the season this year. I was like, man, what can we do that I really thought about and haven't had the ability to do? I mean, Durham Academy is rich in tradition long before I got here. Across North Carolina has been around for about 30 odd years, and DA has been in 17 state title games in those 30 years, especially in those early years, was the forefront leader and kind of forging ahead in this part of the country, took on a lot of national teams and spring break trips and those things. And we have a lot of proud alums who went on and did really good things at the next level and are really good guys. So I said, how can we reach back in the experience of those guys and help put a footprint for our program long after I leave that encompasses all 30 of those years with all the pride those guys have had. And I'm only the fourth head coach in the program. Guys started was for a couple of years. Joe Seivold, who had a great career here and was a great player at Carolina, led the team to a lot of great success through the 90s and early 2000s. There was an interim guy, Michael Keeney, between him and I that stayed on as my middle school coach after a few years. And then I've been here going on now my 14th year. So we did a leadership council. I reached out to 8 guys locally that played in college that are still here in and around the Triangle area, and 2 guys in every grade, all the coaches, my 3 current guys that are playing in college, one at Syracuse, one at Duke, and one at Haverford, and all the way down to the middle school guys, the 7th grade. And we've started this leadership council, and I gave them all a prompt. The first meeting, we did a Zoom call, and I said, come to the meeting prepared. I want everybody to bring one word that would best describe how you feel about Durham Academy lacrosse. And we got 40-year-old guys down to 12-year-olds that have never played a varsity game. And we wrote them all down. We had some discussion about why. We did a Venn diagram. Then the older guys, we got back together and crafted, got a Google Doc going, some bright guys, started dicing up the words and crafted an awesome working purpose mission statement for our program. And we're taking those words in the Venn diagram they work off of, and we're going to see and vet those out and what they look like in real time for our program. What does accountability look like if you're a Durham Academy lacrosse player? What is, grit or respect? Those words, what do they actually mean, or what would or could or should they look like in real time? So I'm changing right now in how I'm determining leadership in my program. I was always a traditional sense guy, a couple of captains. At this level, I did a lot of the leading, and it's great when you got great kids. When you're a young team, it's hard when the coach is doing a lot of it. So I'm trying to develop leaders better, make sure we don't have a gap or a couple of years where a really strong group of kids leaves and there's a void of guys who don't know how to lead or we're given the opportunity to lead. So leadership groups piece I'm moving into. Captains, I've worked for coaches that voted and ones that have picked. I am a choose captain guy at our level. I think there's 2 schools of thought on leadership by the kids and in the peer groups. If you let them vote, typically you get the voice of the kids to the adults. If you pick, you should be picking kids that can articulate the voice of the adults or expectations of the adults down to the kids. And I've felt that that's been a little more effective for those macro things we talked about at the beginning, is to have my messaging with a committed group of guys that get it, making sure that they're role modeling that every day and the conduit for those choices and things the kids have to bounce off of, for those tough things and how they're feeling is probably a better way to approach it, for me at least. And they all work. I'd be curious when we do the Q&A to hear how different people view these things inside the program, because I'm evolving here and trying to do it better, differently, more empowering for kids, all those things. So, leadership, I think, it's important, right? You have to have people that are role modeling those cultural and things that you want communicated that matter, that have those parameters that keep us in check, and making sure that you have people you can look to that are doing the right thing. And I tell my kids all the training rules when I meet every kid that I'm considering being a captain. We meet multiple times. I don't choose captains until right before the season starts. The whole rest of the year is basically tryout time. They're all given opportunities to make choices and do or not do things. In the end, I have them all read the training rules, which talk about substance abuse and alcohol and those things. And I always tell the kids, listen, I'm old, but I'm my head buried in the sand. I know that not everybody's going to hold this standard, but if I'm asking you to lead my team, you absolutely have to. And I tell them all the time, like, listen, I'm not going to hold it against you if you say no, but if you can't do that, then you need to say no. I mean, it's just not, you're just going to cut me off at the knees when I'm saying this is the person I'm choosing, and you are out there doing things in direct conflict of that. So, so I think that, there's a lot of latitude here. Obviously, your style and personality have a lot to do with it, particularly with younger kids. But yeah, curriculum, those kind of things. There's a lot of things out there that can help shape what you do or help the kids shape what you do. But yeah.
Coach, question just came in, and having played for you, I know the answer to this, but this is your forum. So the question: is it appropriate to choose the best players to be captains?
My answer is, two of the best players that have ever played for me at Durham Academy, neither were captains. One was a high school All-American. It had nothing to do. He was a good kid. Both these guys were good kids. They just were at that time in their life not capable of worrying about everybody else for lots of reasons. You never know what's going on. What we do, we kind of know what's going on in kids' lives a little bit, what their extenuating circumstances are. And both those boys, I felt, would have been damaged by feeling like they had to hold some standard of a whole bunch of other guys accountable, and they were having a really tough time in their own lives. So no, I don't think that that's an absolute. And some of my best leaders have been role guys. There's nothing more. I'll use an example of my time at Duke in 2005 when we went to the national championship game. We only had one senior starter, and all of our captains were seniors. Not one of them played meaningful minutes. And I'll tell you what, kids like Billy Garish and Joe Kennedy and those guys, Benny Brenneman, like nobody worked harder in a practice than any of those guys. For all these guys, like a young Matanowski and Greer and all those guys, like it was hard to take a day off when you looked at a kid who had double knee surgeries, had a chance to play, got knocked out, winning every sprint, and they knew they weren't going to play. So no, leadership comes in lots of forms. I don't think that being a great player is a prerequisite to being a great leader. Almost to the contrary at times. So I hope that answers your question. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't.
Another one come in. There's a couple parts to this one. So the spoken a lot about values and institutional parameters, and how these things can be communicated within the programs. Openness, honesty, humbleness, perhaps when you've made a mistake. So the question is, can you speak a little bit more on how you go about getting your support staff on side and how you would handle a difficult member of the staff?
Wow, that's a tough question right there. I mean, I think for me personally, Brad knows this about me. I've always, it's my time at DA, I've had awesome assistant coaches, but I've had ties to all these guys. I've coached them or known them some other ways, and guys that have come to me that want to coach or be part of it. I'm not quick to say yes, even if you were a great player, whatever. I mean, the idea of building trust and relationships and having these discussions prior, and the things we talked about at the very beginning for the people that support you and are interacting with the kids. I mean, there's nothing worse than somebody on your staff not having full buy-in for what those macro things are, what you're trying to do. And you talk about leadership, those are like your intimate leaders, right? Like in between your captains and the kids are your your staff. Typically, there's usually a younger guy in there or whatever. I had one guy along the way who was a great kid, whatever, was young, kind of immature, and social media stuff. And he had friended some guys, and it's against school policy. And, that was a big gaffe, right? And it really hurt my trust with him. And, he only worked 1 year for me. And it wasn't like he wasn't a good kid and he did a good job with the guys. But, that was a big gaffe and something I couldn't overlook. So I think clear and effective communication from the very beginning, starts there, right? The people that are representing you to the kids and to the parents. And because ultimately in the end, if you're the leader of that ship, the buck stops at you. So if you're empowering somebody to lead that you're not really sure of, that don't get it, and kind of Brad was talking about that earlier in the messaging and what you're saying, you all got to be coming from the same place. And as a college assistant, I learned this a lot. I mean, like you can argue and disagree, but when you come to consensus, or the person in charge says, hey, I hear you, but this is the way it's going to be. When the door opens, you all have to be on the same page, period. And you got to make sure that you have adult, relationships to work through those things. So those are tough moments, man. And there's nothing more debilitating as a head coach is to have support staff or people with you that aren't supporting you or don't understand what you're trying to do, or there's a breakdown in communication there. It's really hurtful for the kids and for what you're trying to do. So hopefully that gives you some sense of at least where I come from on that front.
So part 2 of that was, how does the lacrosse program integrate with the larger structure of the school, meaning academics and other extracurricular programs? Now, you have some dual sport athletes, I believe. Do you not?
Most of them. If not dual sport athletes, Brad, like kids that are multifaceted. Like some of my best players have been unbelievable, like musicians. My 1 year, my 2 best guys, one was a Division I bound guy, but they were leads in a musical, So, I think once again, it's getting harder and harder on that front in an institutional setting. We were just talking about this in our athletic admin team meeting about updating our handbook. There's more and more conflicts happening internally in your school. Like our debate team, we have a really high-end academic place. Our debate team has really grown. And, listen, it's a thing that kids put on their resume to help them, be in a more advantageous place for college, or perceived at least. And there's a lot of inherent conflicts. And once again, when it gets really hard on the kids, what we don't want to do is ever put the kid in the place where the adults aren't communicating and they're in the middle of it. And, I really tend to work really hard at communicating to my overall, and any of those kids are doing multiple things that everybody knows what everybody's doing. So we can make the best choice for the kid. The kid should never feel like 2 adults are fighting over them. But whatever's in the best interest of the kid should be done. Sometimes that might suck for you because you might be on the losing end of that. But if it's in the right thing for the kid, you should do that. So, yeah.
Thanks, Coach.
All right, so we'll move this to the conclusion piece. I want to kind of get into the end about the lacrosse part of it a little bit. Skill development planning, like start to finish. And I think this really goes on. You can't even get to this part of it unless you're establishing those things at the very beginning. Like what's important, right? What are the values that we have as a group? They're going to help us stay together, achieve something, and engage, like we said at the very beginning, in the process of trying to get a result, right? The best result we can. And the result does matter, right? The idea that we're trying to win and be competitive, and the journey of that is where the real lessons are, right? And where we really draw value, right? For kids' growth and development, for our own growth and development. And a lot of that trust in things that matter happen not during the season, right? And I think here is where it's getting really hard for high school coaches, right? The idea that the club dynamic, the idea of the value that college coaches over the last 8-10 years have put on where they see kids, the early recruiting piece, which is finally obviously moving back in the other direction. Those conduits of early communication put the high school coach, traditional high school coach, in a tough spot. And I'll say this, the development of, I think strongly about this, and there's a lot of this in the scholastic game. The quickest way to short high school career is have your primary business be club, pay-for-play lacrosse overlaid in the high school program. I mean, they're just not built for one another. And I tell anybody, do one or the other. And my time at DA, I coached a club team for like my first year. I did it when I was at Duke. I coached the higher end club guys out of this area before club was a real big deal. This is like the mid 2000s. And I coached them for one more summer after I got to Durham Academy. And I'll never forget a friend of mine who worked at Duke, whose kids went to DA. Kids weren't out on the team though. Kind of tell him what I was doing for the summer. And I never forget, he goes, "Hey John, listen, aren't you the Durham Academy coach? You're coaching East Chapel Hill guys, Apex guys, Ravenscroft guys?" He's like, "Man, last year, if you were at Duke and you spent your summer taking money to train the Tar Heels and then hoped you could beat them in the spring, would that ever have happened?" I was like, "No." And he goes, "And that was the last time I ever coached a club team." And he's right. And your kids need to know that you're invested in them. There's nothing worse than the high school coach that only wears his club stuff around, that's hugging the other guys all the time after the games and whatever, mutual respect. But your guys want to know that you're invested in them first and foremost, right? And that trust, that time, that piece happens in you being present with your time, right? If you're giving your time to other kids all the time, and then you get to February, like, all right, let's go, whatever. But the kid's like, "Hey man, where were you all fall? When I'm out doing whatever." So I only give my time to things that support my program. So, I'm actively involved in the local recreation program. Myself and a couple former Tar Heels, we help run the rec youth ball in our area. I coach the Durham Academy first and second grade team. I have for a decade. Two of my alums coach the third, fourth, and the fifth and sixth grade DA teams, and we play in our local league, and we play and support other kids at our place because we're fortunate to have the really nice facilities. But the idea of being invested in the kids from the very beginning, it makes it cool. They want to be part of it. I have my guys come out and help in the fall. We do like a fall clinicking youth thing, and my guys are the support staff. So my little DA guys know the Shaffer Woodies and the Tyler Carpenters, and they want to be those guys when they're little. So it takes a lot of energy and work to do that. But the plan for progress, starts from the bottom of the pyramid up. And I always say there's three concepts to building players. Technical skills, right? Concepts and ideas. Tactical play, which is actually playing the game. That for the most part, the technical skills piece and the concepts and ideas is where you should be spending the bulk of your time at this level. Even when you get into the season, you get ready to play games. It'll vary depending on how much work or where your group is, young, experienced, whatever. But you can never do enough technical skill work. You can never reinforce concepts and ideas better or more. In the end, tactical play takes care of itself if you have base skill sets to support the converting full field game, that you have skills that support the half field concepts of offense or defense, or picking the ball up or what to do. I mean, it doesn't really matter what you put in for tactical play. That'll just be dictated by the athleticism of your kids and the moving pieces, but they all should have the base skills to do certain things. Like if you can't throw a redirect pass, then, obviously there's certain ways you can't convert the ball out of your end or clear the ball. So the idea of building players is ingrained for me in those three things, like technical skills, concepts, ideas, tactical play. And that email I said at the beginning that I send right at the end of the state tournament has in the summer skill sessions. We go out 4 days a week in the summer for 8 weeks, and we go at 7 a.m, and I'm always out there the first day after exams end, June 6th, with my extra large Dunkin' Donuts coffee and 200 lacrosse balls and a bunch of ladders and the cones, and we just get after trying to get better. And the investment and trust in each other, those kids dragging each other out. And I'll tell you, the club guys, our best guys, they get home from a tournament on Sunday night, and they're out there on Monday morning. They don't use an excuse not to be there. They're invested in our guys, our team. And we take Fridays off so we don't pinch those guys so they can get out the club and do events. But so, and I'll take this. I think I got this quote. I played my first year of pro indoor lacrosse. I was fortunate enough to play in Detroit, and I played on the same line as Paul and Gary Gate. They were a year ahead of me in school. And we were talking about developing teams, and Gary Gates said this to me. He said, John, you don't win with the best guys, you win with the other guys. And that has just stuck with me forever. Like at the high school level, most importantly, you could have 3 high-end club guys that are great. If they're not supported by the other guys, it doesn't matter how good they are, you will not win big. You'll win enough, but you won't win big. Great high school programs are invested in the other guys. And, listen, I host that big tournament every year at the beginning of the King of Spring tournament. And we have, Calvert Hall here, the Hill Academy comes down every year, those guys, and all the teams from Texas and Georgia and Florida and all over the place. And the programs that are rooted in developing their guys, and they're not all college-bound guys. You remember, an average high school team, 98% of them have maybe 1 or 2 guys that move on to play college a year, if any. It doesn't mean they're bad high school programs, all right? So, it's great to go watch Calvert Hall. I got to see them play twice this spring before the season ended. And, man, they're impressive, all right? But, that's the one-off, right? Most of them we're trying to plug holes, hide somebody, figure out, give a guy a pole, tell an athlete, make a guy a player. That's what we're trying to do. So, how do you develop the other guys? Like the culture, the communication, the leadership. I believe that you can create that. Like you can create dedication to wanting to play. Like it's a learned skill. And, I'm all over my guys to make playing cool and fun and practicing fun and screwing around out there on a Saturday with some tunes and learn how to catch the ball behind your head and teaching the kid how to catch and throw who knows fast and tough will pay dividends for your season. So I think those things are really important. So what's your year look like? What are the rules? Some states don't let your coaches operate as a group in the summer. Some do. Your academic calendar. I don't ever take my guys to play in any event as a team. It just doesn't fit our school. And I'd be honest with you, don't have a boatload of guys that play club. And we always love, but my guys are practicing. They're just not paying to practice. And I always love when we get to the year, we're kind of like a big mystery. They know we got 1 or 2 guys and they're like, man, they didn't think we'd be any good. And like, we're grinding to get better. We're just not out there in the public limelight grinding to get better. So I love that aspect of our program and the real trust, long-term relationships with the guys and the knowing that you're vested in them and wanting to know what they're doing comes from those moments, not the season. So I think that's really, really important. So, collective goals for skill development. I do a wall ball video for my guys. I don't ever time them, but I know like Coach Kelly at Calvert Hall says they have like a timed wall ball test. They have so many kids that are playing. Like, I don't even know if you can like have a chance to be on a team unless you can pass it, right? So it's a minimum expectation for skills. And you don't have to be a big student. You can be 120 pounds. You can swing the ball around. You can play at Calvert Hall. It just comes down to your stick. And then, I don't know, that question mark is whatever you have an idea. Like, I don't know, like I'd love to hear some ideas on that front. And the idea of just making it fun and competitive and cool, and kids will stay engaged and be yourself and authentic. And, I'm a generally nice guy. I'm a steely competitive guy on game day. And Brad knows this, having played for me even way back when. I haven't changed that much. We had a good time in practice. And we drew a great line for hard work and fun. And the leaders and those guys, like Brad, when I got there, knew what that line was and kept the guys from crossing it. So fun is the result, right? Trying to get to the result, and positive results are just, bottom line, more fun than the negative ones. So hard work and fun kind of go together in the results. So, how much time do you spend on this stuff? Like I said, I think skill development should just stay rooted in your practice plans. I'm a big practice plan guy. Never come to practice without a practice plan. I write down, segment our time, and it's segmented like that. It's segmented in technical skill sessions, concepts and ideas, and tactical play. And I would say 80% of my practice every day revolves around technical skills and concepts and ideas. You don't need a bunch of coaches to do it. Brad will tell you, his senior year at St. Andrews, I was the only coach, though we had a smaller roster. I don't think we got cheated in practice. I mean, you can do both. You just be organized. So I think that's it, Brad. I don't know if we want to close things up here for what we're doing, but
No, you know what? We had a couple of questions. One of them went back to but the discussion facing integration of the lacrosse program within the larger complex of being integrated at Durham Academy. So the question, and this kind of hits home because I have some friends who are in states where lacrosse isn't recognized as a school sport
Yep.
yet.
Yeah,
So
right.
it was advice for programs who are not affiliated with a school that might be self-funded or there's no school association at all.
Well, North Carolina was that way for not the independent schools where I am, but the public schools up until 2000. I don't know, man, like late 2000s. They've only been sanctioned in North Carolina for like a decade. But that group of coaches was really forward-thinking. Guys like Jim Kirkley and John Hayden at Apex and these guys, they ran those club affiliated programs by every letter of the law of the state, because when they finally got the opportunity to push forward, it wasn't a hard call for the schools in the states to support them. And they got, so I would say that if you're in a program like that and you want, and everybody should want and work towards that if you can, that you should be doing all those things regardless if you're directly affiliated with the program or not. You should know what they are and you should be abiding by it.
But for this coach, for example, how would they make inroads at their local high school? Like I have got a friend in Tennessee.
Yeah.
And he said it was just so hard to get cooperation. And he finally got it. And I said, well, what did you do? And he said, finally, I was just nice.
Yeah, no, I think you can't be abrasive. What it comes down to in the end is, I'll go back to the very beginning. You make it about the kids, right? If you do a great job in the youth feeder program and you want to build a program in your community, and here you are in like the 6th or 7th grade with a core group of like 15 guys that are pretty good that want to play. They're going to the same high school, and that school doesn't have a program. You would enlist an AD and have a meeting and say, listen, these boys, they really want an opportunity. They're really good, and start the conversation of what you can do as a parent group, as a group. Like, can we have a club? What would be the chances of it being school sponsored at the club level and then maybe a varsity? Like, I think that you need to, in a nice way, provide the questions and the answers. And, listen, good ADs want opportunities for kids. That's what sports are. So if it can be done, it'll be done. If you got an old school guy that doesn't want to do it, then, that's a tough call. It happens. But most good administrators, if there's a group of kids and they can provide an opportunity and it can be done, they'll do it. So nice. I'd say just stay with it.
Okay. Well, you know what, Coach, we just went over the hour here. If there's any more questions, please pop them in the chat. Coach, you got to go, or you got a few minutes to?
I can stay, man. I'm good, man. I'm good.
Yeah. So if anybody's got questions, throw them in the Q&A box and try and get Coach Lantzy here to wrap this up for us.
Yeah. Hopefully I wasn't too long-winded, guys.
No, there's a lot of good content there. I mean, some of it I'm pretty familiar with. It hasn't changed that much. It's just now in a PowerPoint.
Yeah, correct. Right. I mean, you lived a little bit of that real time. I'll say it's a great story about Brad at the end.
No.
No, I mean, this is a good thing. I got to St. Andrews that Brad played for the previous coach who started the program. They were very good when they first got started. Very good, like tops in Division II, competed with some Division I guys. I don't know. Didn't you beat Drexel or like lost to Penn by a few back in those days? Like,
yeah, I think we lost to Penn by a few and lost to Drexel by 1.
Yeah. So, really good Division II program. I got down there in a transition time where things kind of fell apart for a lot of these reasons that we're talking about. Brad, I mean, There's no way we could share any of those stories out here, but for a lot of these things not happening, things fell apart. I had to come in and kind of rebuild. And I met with all the seniors, didn't know much about St. Andrews. There wasn't a lot of the internet back then. This is 97, and came down from Buffalo, New York, to this tiny little town in rural North Carolina with my wife, and just married. I met these guys, like, what do you guys want? I remember Brad, Kevin McGaw, and Tom Riley, and Mike French, and these guys. They were like, Coach, we can be good. We want to go for it. Like, just schedule thing. We're on board. Whatever you want to do. And I said, all right, guys, all I want is you to be all in. And at the end of this year, no matter, we don't want to talk about what we can't control, which is the past. And I said, just want you to hand in your jersey at the end of 4 years, at the end of this year, and say thanks. And in symbolism piece, we go up to Delphi at the end of the year. They were really good. We lost in the Deep South tournament, but upset Limestone in the semifinals and lost a grinder game to Pfeiffer in the Deep South final. And went to Delphi. They were really good. They won the national championship. Lost a tough game. The next day, drove to Maryland and played Southampton, which ranked like 5th in the country at UMBC. And we just grind out. It's a high-scoring game. And I'll never forget the end of that game. We were down a goal. There was like 7 seconds left in the game. A foul had happened on time, and like, so I call a timeout. We're man up, but there's 7 seconds left in the game, and it's on the side of outside of the box. And I'll never forget, Brad and Tom would play the whole game back then. Tom and Brad were both first-team All-Americans, academic All-Americans, great players. The huddle just parted. And they were having a conversation on the way in, and Brad goes, "Hey, Tom's going to take it, Coach. I'm going to be on the crease. He's got a better left hand than me. It was on the left side of the field." He said, "Just everybody get on the other side of the goal." And I'll never forget. I'm like, "All right, sounds like a plan." We go out there, whistle blows. Tom makes a move, drives hard. I'll never forget it. He drills the shot. It hits I'll never forget it. It hit the shaft of the defenseman right in front of, or the goalie's shaft. And Brad literally was standing in front of it, picked it up one-handed on the rebound, threw an underhand shot in with 1 second to go in the game. And then I think Tom scored in overtime to win the game. Brad ran up to me at the end, gave me a big hug, and just said, "Hey," and symbolism, just gave me his jersey, said, "Coach, thanks." And I always remember that moment and that's a long time ago now, but that was an important moment for me because those guys invested a lot of energy into changing the program, and they did. And we got really good again. Took some time, but it was laid by the foundation of those guys wanting to change the culture of what we were doing day to day at St. Andrews, and something I'm really proud of in my 4 years there. And couldn't have done it without the help of guys like Brad and Tom and Kevin and those guys. So thank you for Brad for that. It's my first year as a head coach, being my first captain and allowing that to be successful. So and we had a good year. Finished ranked in the top 10 in the country, and we had a good year. So
it's always nice to graduate when you can depart on a win, and that was emotional. And yeah, Tom scoring the winner. I mean, I remember that too. We were behind the net, and same thing. We cleared out, moved away, and he went. So it was awesome. But Coach, I want to thank you for your time. Like the content here is phenomenal. I know there's some great takeaways. I've got some people here just drop a note saying thank you very much. So it's very much appreciated. The replay, it will be loaded up again tonight. So if you've got friends that have missed it, or high school coaches that couldn't be here for whatever reason, please direct them to it. And we will be back on at 6 o'clock with Brian Shanahan, who's going to discuss building a lacrosse community and building community, period.
awesome.
In great thing, Mimico, Ontario. So,
all right, man.
Okay. Thanks for your time, Coach. Take care.
Great seeing you, man.
You too. Take care.
Bye, buddy.